Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, December 1st. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing, making beer at home. Well, this week we conclude our interview with John Palmer on all-grain brewing. In this half of our chat, we pick up where we left off in the process and go on to talk about sparging and pH as it pertains to all-grain brewing. Well, before we get started, I want to mention a few things. First of all, some of you have taken time to list yourself on the Frapper map I mentioned last week. Some just put their first name and where they're from, and some go further and add their full names and a comment, and some have even posted pictures. It's a lot of fun to see names I recognize from past emails and some that are new. I appreciate everybody taking the time to play with the map. You can find a link to the map in the description of this past week's episode, and I'll try to figure out a permanent place to put a link on the site. You just kind of get a visual overview of a bit of the world of Basic Brewing Radio listeners. In the shameless self-promotion department, if you want to support this podcast while you're out doing your online holiday shopping, you can click on the Amazon.com link on the basicbrewingradio.com site. And if you click on the little black box and purchase something from Amazon, 5% of your purchase comes here to support our efforts here at the podcast. Now, I don't get to see who buys what, but I do get a list of the items that have been purchased through the Amazon associate link. So if you decide to do that, I appreciate it. And thanks very much in advance, and happy holidays. Now, one more shameless item before we move on. Thanks to everybody who's purchased a T-shirt from the site. If you send me a picture of yourself in your shirt, brewing or doing something cool in a cool place, I'll build a gallery to show those pictures off to everybody. You know, it's strange, but most who have bought T-shirts are in warmer places in the world. So go figure. You know, the timing of the marketing the T-shirt in the wintertime. Before I forget, I want to ask for your help. I want to do a show in a couple of weeks on good gift ideas for brewers for Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever you celebrate. So if there's a piece of gear that's been on your wish list for a while and you'd love to see it under the tree or in your stocking or wherever your goodies end up, let me know about it. It could be a piece of new technology or something that you've been saving up for. But you can send your holiday wish list to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to make your holiday wishes come true. I just think it'd be fun to see what everybody's dreaming about this time of year in their brewing wants and needs and desires, and we can have fun talking about it. You know, maybe you're having visions of counterflow wort chillers dancing in your heads. Well, I have to admit that I was in a bit of hurry to get things wrapped up before leaving town for Thanksgiving last week, so I didn't give the attention I usually give to our mailbag segment, and I apologize for that, and I hope I can make up for it this week. We've got some good email that we can sink our teeth into. Jerry from Rocky Mount, Virginia wrote in after hearing Chris Colby and I talk about ice beer in our interview about the 10 hardest beers to brew. Jerry reminds us that freezing fermented wort and removing the ice crystals is considered a form of distillation and is therefore illegal, at least in the United States. Coincidentally, I was reading a book that talked about that very thing over the holiday, and I appreciate Jerry bringing that up. We want to make sure that you are aware of what the law states. Russ from Boston wrote in to ask for a refresher on how to make Gerard's tea. If you'll remember from our discussions with Gerard Lemons, he suggested steeping hop pellets in hot water before using them for dry hopping. Gerard suggested using just enough water to cover the pellets, and the water shouldn't be above 75 degrees Celsius, and that comes out to 167 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you shouldn't have to soak them for very long, just to warm them up before you get them into the secondary fermenter to release some of those aromatic oils that are responsible for the good hop aroma. Russ was worried about the chance of infection from dry hopping. But the risk of infection is decreased after primary fermentation because the alcohol lowers the pH of the beer, making it less inviting for the little beasties that may cause problems. Matt writes in from Pittsburgh with a 2-for-1 question. He does a split boil with a small pot and can only boil 2.5 to 3 gallons at a time. He's concerned that boiling malt extract at that concentration will lead to some darkening. Matt says he's not overly concerned, but asks if he were to add his extract near the end of the boil to avoid darkening, how would that affect the protein hot break? Well, I went back and listened to Bob Hansen in the recent episode of the show where we talked about tips for brewing with extracts, and he said that the protein has been removed from the extract with a whirlpool before it's either dried or concentrated. So, knowing that, it sounds like you don't have to worry about protein hot break from extracts. Second, you can just add your extract at the last 15 minutes of the boil to sterilize it, so you don't have to worry so much about it being darkened. Now, the second part of Matt's question has to do with isomerization of his hops. He says he's read that more concentrated worts do not pick up as much of the hoppy bitterness as less concentrated worts, and Matt wants to make an ESB, but with a small boil, he's concerned that he might not get as much out of his hops as he would like. Well, I read a couple of articles in Brew Your Own and Zymurgy magazines over the holidays that shed quite a bit of light on this subject. Chris Colby wrote a big article on hopping for stovetop extract brewers in Brew Your Own where he addressed this very topic. And in Zymurgy, Tom Nickel wrote an article about hopping high-gravity beers. Both articles apply in Matt's case because he's brewing an extract beer, and if he's boiling his extract in 2.5 to 3 gallons, what he's got is essentially a high-gravity wort that he's going to dilute with another 2 to 2.5 gallons of water in the fermenter. So the rules for boiling high-gravity worts apply there. Now, as I understand it after reading these articles and other sources, your hop utilization starts to suffer in worts of specific gravity higher than 1.050 or 1050. You got to remember that if you're shooting for 5 gallons of wort with an original gravity of 1050 in your fermenter, and you're only boiling 2.5 gallons, then that 2.5 gallons has to have a gravity of 1.100 or 1100 because you're going to dilute it. Well, that's a big beer. So, in a case like that, it makes sense to start your water boiling, add your bittering hops to just the water to extract the alpha acids from the hops, and let them start isomerizing because the water is, of course, much less dense than wort. Then, 15 minutes before the end of your boil, add your extract to sterilize it. That way, you should get more bitterness from your hops than if you were to add the extract with them at the start of the boil. But wait, there's another factor. There's apparently a ceiling on the amount of IBUs, or international bitterness units, that you can get into a solution, and that ceiling is apparently 100. So they say that no matter how much hops you add to a volume of wort or water, you'll top out at 100 IBUs. Now think of what this means to Matt and his split boil. If he's shooting for a huge beer with lots of IBUs, if he gets 100 IBUs in his 2.5 gallon boil, that means that he'll only get 50 IBUs in his fermenter because he's going to be adding 2.5 gallons of water, diluting his IBUs by half. So, if you're going to be making a huge Imperial IPA with tons of IBUs, over 50, it looks like you're going to have to get a bigger pot. Now, I hope this stuff makes sense, and I hope that if you're a beginning brewer or you're thinking about getting into brewing for the first time, that you won't let all this technical detail worry you. You know, beer is pretty forgiving. You can do a lot of things that are technically not the best practice and still come out with a beer that's way better than most of what you'd find in the store. I say, get your basic processes down and get comfortable with brewing and have fun with it. And then as time goes on, you can start sweating the details like squeezing every bit of IBU out of your hops as possible or avoiding 1 or 2 degrees Lovibond of darkening of your wort. To me, making beer is an escape, a diversion, something that I just love to do. I'm to the point that I can tweak my process and worry about the tiny technical details because to me the basic brewing process is pretty much automatic. But in the beginning, I think if I had to worry too much about hop utilization or pH or other technical things, I might have just thrown up my hands and given up. So go at your own pace and have fun and worry about the details later. Graham from Washington, D.C. says he's been brewing for about 10 years and says he's finally got enough room to move up to a full-size boil. He's looking at buying a turkey fryer, but is concerned about whether the aluminum pots that come with them are good for brewing. Well, in the first part of our chat with John Palmer, he recommended aluminum pots because of their even heating ability. There was a concern for a while that cooking with aluminum would cause Alzheimer's disease, but I think that has since been disputed and disproved. Now, this is another one of those much talked about topics in the homebrewer community. I've used an enamel pot for many years, and I've been happy with it. My friend Steve just bought an aluminum pot, and he seems to be happy with that. And others out there swear by stainless steel. But as I understand it, that can be pricey. So, it depends on who you talk to. I've mentioned on a past show that if you're looking to buy a turkey fryer to brew with, be sure that you get one that's stable and won't tip over easily for safety's sake. I took a part in a brew session a couple weeks ago where one of the guys had a turkey fryer that had a nice, stable burner. So they are out there if you look hard enough. Now, I hope that makes up for the short mail segment this past week. On to our interview with John Palmer, author of How to Brew. He took a break from writing the latest edition of his book to talk to us about all-grain brewing. Last week we started with milling of the grain, and we got up to mashing, and now we'll take it from there. Now we've got our mash in our mash lauter tun. And let's say that the time is over on our rests, and we've got our sugars converted. Now we've got to get that wort out of there. Let's talk a little bit about lautering and about sparging. Where do we go from here?
Okay, well, yeah. So an hour has gone by. You've done your single temperature infusion mash in your mash tun. An hour has passed, and now it's time to drain the wort out. You've got what we call your first runnings are in the cooler or in the grain, and that's very high in sugar content. You can sparge this or not sparge it in a couple of ways. There's three methods. There's no sparge, where you just drain that wort and ferment it, and that's a very high gravity wort that you're draining. You've got a continuous sparge, which is what is used by most of the commercial breweries around the world, where as you drain wort from the tun, you're adding in an equal volume of water on top of the bed to rinse all the grain of the sugars that they still contain, and you're trying to get as much extract out of the grain as you can, because that's money. That fermentable sugar is money to a commercial brewery. In between, you have a method called batch sparging, where you drain the first runnings, and then you add back another 3 or 4 gallons of water to the tun, stir up the grain bed, let it sit for a few minutes, 5-10 minutes, leach some more sugars out of that grain, and then drain the second runnings and combine those 2 runnings in your boiling pot.
And that's another source of debate.
Yes, it is.
There's another controversy in the homebrewing community on whether whether to fly sparge or whether to batch sparge.
Yeah, I started out, and so many of us did, doing fly sparging or continuous sparging, where you got the rotating sparge arm above the grain bed, and you're carefully sprinkling water on and spending a good hour and a half, gently rinsing the grain bed and collecting 7 or 8 gallons of wort in your boiler, trying to get enough extract out of the grain to make your recipe. A lot of time and effort, and satisfying if you're able to do it right, but batch sparging and no sparging represent a lot less time invested in obtaining that wort. Maybe you're going to use another pound of grain in your recipe to make up for a little difference in an extraction efficiency. But when you can just, finish that mash, drain the wort, pour in another 3 gallons of water, stir it around a minute, drain it again, and start your boil, you've shortened your brew day by an hour.
Yeah, and then you can go to the birthday parties and such.
That's right.
and also, if you're fly sparging, you've really got to watch out that you don't over-sparge and start drawing astringencies from the tannins of the husk.
That's right. When you're fly sparging, you don't want your sparge water temperature to exceed about 170 degrees Fahrenheit, because the tannins or the tea-like character of the barley husk is more extracted at those higher temperatures. When you've had a beer that's been over-sparged, it's like sucking on a used tea bag. It's a very dry, puckering kind of finish to the beer, and it's from what we call tannins or polyphenols that come from the grain husks.
It's a noticeable defect.
Yeah, and that's one of the drawbacks of fly sparging is that you need to know your system well enough and plan that recipe with enough grain so that you can get enough wort out of your grain and quit sparging before you pull off enough sugar out of that grain where the only thing left to extract is the tannins.
And you've got to watch your gravity.
That's right.
As you're sparging, and that's difficult to do because the water's so hot, and you've got to correct, in your hydrometer for the hot water temperature. And
yeah, it's a lot of people learn to brew that way, and it's not difficult. It just takes a lot of attention.
It's more to worry about.
Yeah. Batch sparging and no sparging are a lot easier in that regard, and that's what I'm advocating to new brewers these days in my book, is to baseline a batch sparge or a no sparge method, just because they're a lot easier, a lot less effort to get into all grain brewing that way.
Well, let me read the question from Mike in Siloam Springs. Mike says, concerning your upcoming interview with John Palmer, I was wondering if you might ask him to weigh in on the issue of to sparge or not to sparge. This seems to be a hotly debated topic among homebrewers. Over-sparging, of course, can cause an overabundance of tannins in the brew. I should have read this question earlier, I guess. The idea being that the brewers do not have the equipment sophisticated enough to control temperature and flow precisely during the sparge. They can skip that step by upping the grain bill by about 1.4 and increasing hop quantities 1.1 or more, collecting about 3 gallons of liquid, then diluting with an additional 2 gallons of boiled and cooled water. So he's not sparging at all, he's saying. This would not be an option for micro and larger brewers because of the additional grain expense, but for home brewers, this additional expense would not be that great. So he's saying that, if you don't want to sparge at all, you just add more grain, which is, relatively inexpensive for all grain brewers.
That's right.
And just make up for it that way.
Yeah, no sparge brewing is nice. It decreases the complexity once again, where you don't have to add more water, recirculate, stir, and drain again. You're just going to take that initial draining of the mash tun and to your boiler and then to your beer. You can plan your grain bill and your water volume to get your intended boiling volume and boiling gravity. Let's say you want to do a 5-gallon batch of 1050 beer, a 1050 original gravity. That you can collect. Where's my handy dandy calculator? It's buried under some papers here. But you can collect, 6 gallons of, say, a 1056 wort, or to make that 1050 of 5 gallons. And you can plan out your grain bill to achieve that, from a single draining, where you don't have to dilute in the fermenter. Of course, if you've only got a 5-gallon brew pot, on your kitchen stove, and you can only really comfortably boil 3 or 4 gallons in that pot, then yeah, you would want to start out with a higher gravity boil and then dilute in the fermenter just because of your space considerations.
In a similar fashion that a lot of people do with an extract boil.
That's right.
Now there's a lot of discussion on the forums that I read and the American Homebrewers Association's Tech Talk that comes out on pH and people being concerned about the pH of their water in the mash and in sparging. Can you weigh in on that, and how concerned do people have to be with pH when they're doing an all-grain brew?
Yeah, this is a very deep topic. You have to be concerned to some extent. Brewing is a very, forgiving process. I mean, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, brewers were making beer without all the technology we have today, pH meters included. I don't know if you knew this or not, but the whole concept of pH and measuring pH was invented by brewers. It all came out of a brewing laboratory. The reason they did it is because they knew that different grain bills, different kinds of malts, in different waters from different locations would either work or it didn't work. The beer would not turn out. The starch conversion wouldn't work well if they tried to brew a very light beer in Munich, or if they tried to brew a dark beer in the Czech Republic, in the Pilsen area. They just, the beer wouldn't turn out right. So the water, the local water, and the alkalinity of the local water combines with the acidity of the malts to create a balance that the mash enzymes look for. The enzymes in the mash are most comfortable with a pH range of about 5 to 6. Now I could get a lot deeper into that and say, okay, this enzyme wants a pH from 4.8 to 5.2, and this one wants one from 5.3 to 5.6. But in general, they will all work between 5 and 6 pH. You can read a lot of scientific papers where they've measured the optima for these enzymes in various experiments and come up with different optima based on how they measured it and so on. But like I said, brewing is a very robust process, a very forgiving process.
If you are an average brewer, do you have to worry about pH when you're with your home brewing system and doing an all-grain brew?
Generally, no, you don't. Generally, if you take your local water, whether it's a well or just the tap water, people off the city water system are probably have a lot better luck than someone going off an average well. But that water, that average water with a beer of average color, say like a pale ale, something that's an amber color, that beer will work. The mash pH will be in the right range for all the enzymes to work, and the beer will turn out fine. It's when you get into an area such as South Texas, where there's a lot of alkalinity in the water because of limestone. When the alkalinity is very high, you need to brew very dark beers that have a lot of malt acidity to balance the alkalinity in the water to get the mash pH in the right range. And that's how the stouts of Ireland were invented. They have alkaline water, hard alkaline water in the Dublin area, and dark beers worked. In the Czech Republic, in the town of Pilsen, they have very soft water, water without minerals, and very low alkalinity. And their dark beers didn't work. Dark beers come out very harsh tasting, but light amber Pilsner beer was the style of beer invented there. In fact, that's how all of the world's famous beer styles originated. Really, it's a combination of the malts and the water that was available for brewing. So, it's as a beginning all-grain brewer, you really should be aware of this concept of what's called residual alkalinity. That is, the balance of the alkalinity of the water, the hardness of the water, and the acidity of the malts. You would look at your local water analysis report and find the ion concentrations that drive residual alkalinity, and by looking at that, gain some understanding of what beer you could brew most easily with your water. You can adjust your water with the use of brewing salts such as gypsum, calcium carbonate, calcium chloride, and change your mash pH and adjust it to brew a style of beer that would otherwise be difficult for your area. And that's when we really start getting into a lot of chemistry. In my book, in chapter 15, I try to lay that out in a pretty logical manner, explaining what's what, how to read a water report, and I have a nomograph that helps you understand the residual alkalinity concept for your area.
But for your first batch, don't worry about it.
Yeah, for the first batch, don't worry about it. Go ahead, try it. You're probably going to be okay. It's when, if that first batch doesn't convert well, it doesn't seem to turn out well, then you may want to take a little deeper look at it. Or when you try to, if you want to say, I want to brew a golden pilsner, or I want to brew a Russian Imperial Stout, that's when you probably need to get a hold of your water report and do a little bit of investigation to find out if those two extremes in beer style are achievable with your water.
And that might be also where it would be a good idea to join your local homebrew club, or get in touch with your local homebrew store owner or a local expert who's brewed these beers and knows a bit about the local water, and glean some information from them.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, those poor brewers down in Texas. I spent a week with them down in Houston, and they routinely dilute their tap water with distilled water or bottled water to get control of the alkalinity in their water to do a variety of beer styles. And they are some excellent brewers down there. I tasted a lot of really good beers.
Now, there's the makers of Star San have come out with a product, I believe, that stabilizes or it purports to stabilize the mash pH at what, 5.2?
Yeah, it's the product is called 5.2. It's I've used it. My water here in the Los Angeles area is pretty average. It's moderate hardness, moderate alkalinity, and I tend to brew amber-colored beers, so I don't need the product. But I've talked with 5 Star about it, and they said it was designed specifically to help brewers of average colored beers to achieve a mash pH of 5.2 in areas of alkaline water. So, in the Texas area, in the Midwest, where you have more alkalinity in the water than hardness, this 5.2 product added to the mash will help bring that mash pH down to 5.2, which is about the middle of the optimum range for the amylase enzymes. In regions of the country where you have hard water, that is where the calcium and magnesium concentrations are greater than the bicarbonate concentration, that water is not alkaline, and the 5.2 product really isn't needed there, although it'll still work.
Well, I tell you, all grain brewing, we've just scratched the surface, haven't we? On
yeah, you can spend a lot of time with it and a lot of time enjoying it.
Well, I certainly have enjoyed our conversation this evening, and maybe we can have you on again when your book comes out, and or maybe even before then, if we get enough questions.
I'd be happy to.
There are home brewers out there, or at least the ones that have been writing to me, are hungry for information and really enjoy hearing people talk about it. So, and tell us where's the website where we can see your book?
Howtobrew.com. That is HOWTOBREW.com.
And the navigation on the site is great. Just how to, move between chapters and within chapters, and lots of great information out there. And there are a lot of questions, I'm sure, that can be answered by going to your book.
Yeah, and if you get stuck, you can always email me directly from the site. I probably answer 5-10 emails a day.
Wow. Well, we appreciate your time, and
I'm happy to.
And we wish you luck and success with your next edition.
Thank you very much.
Once again, we appreciate John Palmer taking the time to talk to us. You can read the entire first edition of John's book at howtobrew.com. But next week, you're invited to come along to a blind mice brew. Kind of a potluck brew session where brewers bring ingredients to be unveiled at the brew session, and the result is a surprise to everybody. Also, we get to hear how Casey from Siloam Springs makes an all-grain starter with a French press coffee maker. So you'll want to tune in for that. And don't forget to send in your brewing holiday wish list so we can share it with everybody in a couple of weeks. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say hey, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And don't forget to tell us where you're from. And if you're wanting to get into home brewing while you're on our site, you can check out our DVD, Basic Brewing, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing. We'll walk you through the process step by step. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVD. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online. Well, that's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time. So long.